And this one may be a little bit of a connective sort of a show. We're going to be connecting some dots here, but one that I think is very, very fascinating, and one that I think is very, very interesting, and I do believe connected powerfully and profoundly with the Word of God, maybe even more so than just some of our standard Soul Trap shows. There is an interesting connection in Revelation chapter number 18, something that, for most people, that are Bible students, is not necessarily an uncommon or uncommon knowledge, but the term there in Revelation chapter number 18, the term that we use, sorcery, is translated that way in our English Bible, and I believe rightfully so. But its root is that Greek word pharmakeia, from which we get the term pharmaceuticals, pharmacy. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not by any stretch of the imagination anti-medicine. Some people are anti-vaccine, some people are not. I'm not getting into that for this particular podcast. When I have a headache, there's nothing that does me any better than a couple BC powder, and I'm good to go. But there is a very strange and powerful connection when it comes to that term sorcery, pharmakeia, and the spirit world. And that's what we're really going to discuss here for the next few moments, and I think really go down a rabbit hole that is much deeper than we could possibly imagine. One writer states the following from OpenScroll.com. Everyone is now taking drugs for one reason or another. There is that vast array that is sold over the counter, and there's that which finds its way into processed food and drink, which you probably consume several times a day. Then there's the prescription kind. Most doctors who are plied by the pharmaceutical companies are happy as can be to write prescriptions for every symptom on your list, which meets the expectation of and even demands of many patients. To make the point, there's actually a Reuters article from August 1st, 2017 that states that more than one-third of U.S. adults are prescribed opiates in 2015. Now, ladies and gentlemen, most folks are casual about drug use because we've been sold the idea that quote-unquote legal drugs are for our good. Physically, harmless, absolutely. Spiritually, harmless, and we can trust our lives to the professionals. But the evidence to the contrary is mounting, and it is very convincing indeed. The real question that we pose today at the Soul Trap is this: is there a darker agenda than you and I may have imagined being facilitated by the pharmaceutical industry, drugs, however you want to phrase that? And that is a really good question that the writer brings up and the Soul Trap brings up. Sorcery, pharmacy have gone hand in glove, as far back as man can reach in antiquity. Sorcery and the dark arts have sought to use chemical arrangements to manipulate everything, from time to metals to minds, and even the very biological makeup of human beings. Secret potions and alchemy have been the trademark of the darker dimensions. But we have come to believe Satan's propaganda. You see, we tend to think of the powers of darkness as swirling around bonfires and togas, chanting Old Cure and Nine Inch Nails songs. But I submit to you, as I have posited here at the Soul Trap for a long time now, that the powers of darkness have a desire to cross out of their estate into our estate, something that they were judged for by God in the realm of Scripture. We know that to be a true, and that it has moved forward in our life. It is not locked in the medieval times. It's certainly not locked in Babylonian times, and one would far more readily be able to see demonic activity in the cutting edge of human genome and DNA manipulation than they would be in the weekend Dungeons and Dragons marathons that take place in some goth's basement. The word pharmacy and pharmaceutical are derived, as I already mentioned, from the word pharmakeia, and in many cases is directly connected throughout the Bible with sorcery, witchcraft, and satanic rebellion. So, could it be that Satan and the gods are far more invested in the pharmaceutical industry than they are in Marilyn Manson or Lady Gaga. Case in point. Have you ever heard of the company Solvay? Solvay. Solvay is a chemical industry. Solvay is a Belgian chemical company founded in 1863 with its head office in Brussels, Belgium. In 2015, it realized a 12.4 billion euro increase in revenue. Its sales are emerging as one of the highest sales growth in all of the world, and it takes in more than about 43% of other countries. This company makes more money than countries do. They have 145 sites all over the world, and Solvay, that we can tell, employs over 30,000, close to 40,000 people in 53 different countries. It was founded in 1863, and don't be surprised if you haven't heard of it. It's one of those mega companies, one of those ones behind the shadows, behind the curtains, behind, that seems to pull the strings. As I stated, it was founded in 1863 by Ernest Solvay and his brother Alfred to produce sodium carbonate by the Solvay process they discovered. Before World War I, Solvay was the largest multinational company in the world. It was formerly also active in pharmaceuticals, but has recently sold and diversified so that it has been able to actually remove itself one step away while still remaining a parent company and director of the pharmaceutical wing of its company. The company is also a supporter of the Solvay conferences that were started by Ernest Solvay in 1911. Now, you say, okay, Brother Tillis, what's the big deal about the Solvay company and the pharmaceutical, Big Pharma? Well, Solvay was and is the main producer of a drug by the name of Luvox. You're probably not familiar with Luvox, but it is the same thing, the offshoots of Prozac, Xantex, and others. It is a drug that Luvox, it's a drug that has such powerful side effects that it was actually implicated in the Columbine shooting. Here, ladies and gentlemen, we begin our descent down the rabbit hole. In an article entitled Columbine Shooting Victim Sues Solvay Pharma, September 3rd, 2002, from Insight Magazine reporter Kelly Patricia O'Meara reports that 19-year-old Mark Taylor, a victim of the shooting spree at Columbine High School in 1999, spent nearly 2 months in the hospital, plus 3 years of follow-up operations. Taylor is suing the drug company Solvay Pharmaceuticals, manufacturer of Luvox, an antidepressant drug whose adverse side effects include manic and psychotic reactions. The suit claims that Eric Harris, who, by the way, investigators believe was the main and driving force between the two shooters, Eric Harris had been taking Luvox at the time of the shooting and that the drug triggered his violent outburst. Taylor's lawyer, Nebraska attorney John DeCamp, and you might want to remember that name, John DeCamp, and Nebraska and the Franklin affair cover-up. You might want to do your research on that. John DeCamp is quoted as saying, 2 days after I took the case, Solvay pulled Luvox from the market. I don't know if my coming on the case had any bearing on them pulling the drug, but it is interesting, he stated. Solvay removed the Luvox temporarily from the U.S. market to revise data about how Luvox is manufactured. A consultant in Taylor's lawsuit, Dr. Ann Blank Tracy, heads the International Coalition for Drug Awareness. She states the following, quote, suing Solvay for the injuries Mark Taylor suffered is one of the biggest SSRI suits we'll ever see, Tracy stated. It is a pivotal case because what happened at Columbine was so big. It's really crazy when you think about it. All you have to do is read the Luvox package insert to see that Eric's actions were due to an adverse reaction to this drug. Show me a drug anywhere that has listed mania and psychosis as frequent adverse reactions. That is what the insert says of Luvox. There is no doubt in my mind that Luvox caused Eric Harris to commit these acts. Now, let me simply say here that as a Bible believer, I have to say that I would disagree with her terminology, causing it. Now, the Bible says that the heart is desperately wicked, who can know it? The first murder was committed in the outside the Garden of Eden by Cain, and the reality is the heart of man is very, very dark. So I don't know necessarily that it caused it, but did that drug open up this young man to the powers of darkness? Could a drug be so powerful that it alters the very chemical makeup of the brain, that it makes the mind and the eyes and the ears more susceptible, more perceptible to the spirit world? The article goes on to state that the medical record of Dylan Klebold and most school shooters are sealed, allegedly to protect the minor child. But information relating to drugs and adverse reactions to them, especially a propensity to trigger violence, no pun intended, should be accessible to the public, as it is, in fact, becoming a public hazard. Now, this is not an issue of privacy, one would argue, but rather an issue of cover-up. The FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, should use its leverage to demand full disclosure of hazardous drug side effects. Now, the manufacturer, Solvay, the manufacturer of Luvox, was the antidepressant that Harris had been prescribed, and he was taking it at the time of the shooting spree. It is a major reality that is swept under the rug. Everyone goes from the point of denying it to saying there were only trace amounts found in it, but regardless of the matter, the young man was taking one of the most powerful known antidepressant drugs at the time of the shooting. And despite the deadly assault against him, Taylor's perception of the young man who nearly killed him is surprising. Taylor tells Insight magazine, quote, "I'm suing Solvay because I believe that Eric Harris did what he did because of this drug. I didn't know Eric that much personally, but I knew him as one of the, quote, trenchcoat mafia. Everybody thought Eric and Dylan were the nicest people. My cousin, who was in Eric's class, told me that Eric and Dylan used to bring her flowers and cookies. Eric was forced onto these drugs, and I feel sorry for him. Like so many other kids who were put on these drugs. I don't have ill feelings against him since I don't think you can hold him accountable because he didn't know what he was doing." Taylor's lawsuit against Solvay claims that the mind-altering drug Luvox was the cause of Harris's rampage and that the drug made Harris manic and psychotic. Now, what you have to understand is that Luvox is in a class of antidepressants called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And what that does is it interacts with the serotonergic system in the brain, as do Prozac, Zoloft, and Paxil. What's profound about that is that SSRI drugs are the same kind of drug as LSD and ecstasy. There is almost no difference between these kissing cousins of drugs. They both interact with the serotonergic system. Now, I want you to let that sink in for just a moment if you're listening. LSD we put people in jail for. Ecstasy we put people in jail for. But Luvox, Prozac, and Paxil, and Xanax, these are all okay because they're prescribed by a doctor who is told what they are doing. Far away in labs headed by beings we know not from where or what they are or who they are pumping drugs into our kids and marriages and homes, into our society at an unalterable, unimaginable speed. The Food and Drug Administration approved Luvox in 1997 for treatment of obsessive-compulsive behavior in children, but not for the treatment of depression. Again, these are all abstract, made-up diagnoses of issues that are empirically nor scientifically arrived at. How do you scientifically arrive at obsessive-compulsive disorder? How do you scientifically arrive at a diagnosis of depression? How do you scientifically arrive at a diagnosis of anxiety or bipolar? It is one of the greatest con jobs ever pulled on the American quote-unquote mind. And that is the Academy of Psychological Institute. It's nonsense. The Physician's Desk reference, the PDR, records that during controlled clinical trials of Luvox, manic reactions developed in 4% of the children that we're told of. Now, mania is defined as a form of psychosis characterized by exalted feelings, delusions of grandeur, and overproduction of ideas. Court records show that the prescription for Harris had been filled 10 times between April 1998 and March 1999, and that 3.5 months before the shooting, the dose had been increased. A common thread, many experts say, they're finding prior to adverse reaction to psychotropic drugs. The autopsy of Harris revealed a therapeutic, quote, therapeutic level of Luvox in his system. the PDR lists the adverse reactions of Luvox to the nervous system. And here it is. Frequent. Here's what happens frequently. Amnesia, apathy, hyperkinesis, hyperkinosis, manic reaction, psychotic reaction. Infrequently, there is delirium, delusion, depersonalization, drug dependence, emotional liability, euphoria, hallucinations, hostility, hysteria, increased libido, paralysis, paranoid reaction, phobia, psychosis, sleep disorder, stupor, twitching, and vertigo. Anyone up for a dose of that? Now here's the crazy thing, and I want you to think of this with me. How would you actually know how these side effects are coming to be? Doesn't it sound logical? And I could be wrong. But I mean, how are you going to know if a rat is delusional? How are you going to know if a rat has hysteria? I mean, it seems to me that if you're going to tell me that these are all legitimate side effects, there has to be people willing to subject themselves, or other people willing to subject unwilling people to these tests. Some have actually argued that the military has been and is working side by side with these groups to exploit and expand the chemical powers. Some people actually believe that there may be a connection between the massive, under the current, under the radar experiences of people that have been abducted, quote unquote, by UFOs, and the military, working conjointly with the military and these groups to unwittingly and unknowingly test people. Not for nothing, one should remember that Dylan Harris of Columbine, his father was in the Air Force, but that's another matter for another time. Back to the drug abuse by pharmacy companies. Tracy continues in the article, beyond the adverse reactions listed about Luvox, one of the first clues I had that these boys were on antidepressants was when it was made public that Eric and Dylan had both been in anger management classes. Anger management classes equal antidepressants. And unfortunately, Dylan Klebold's medical records have been sealed, so there's no way of knowing what, if anything, that he was on. But it does make sense that if he was in anger management classes, he was probably prescribed some kind of antidepressant. The problem, Tracy concludes, is that this is a public safety issue. So why is everything kept secret, under lock and key? This information should be made available, shouldn't it, to the public? So that people can learn from it? I mean, if we go out of our way to make sure that we have the calorie counters on McDonald's, I mean, do you really need a calorie counter for a Big Mac? Do you really need somebody to tell you that you're going to get fat hips if you eat too many chicken nuggets? Do we really need that? And yet they pass laws. They don't want you drinking a big gulp in New York. But we are pumping our kids and our homes full of these drugs. We've got kids on these drugs that are ticking time bombs, one author says, in every school in America. We have a generation whose teeth are as knives and swords. Most of these drugs are not approved for children, but it doesn't stop doctors from prescribing them. There are no laws, and what laws are there are few and anemic. States should also, one writer says, demand toxicology reports even for suicides and murders, all of it in an attempt to find out if these drugs are affecting us in an adverse way. Eric Harris was first on Zoloft, then Luvox. Dylan Klebold, age 18, we were not allowed to see or understand if he was even involved or prescribed medication. But there you have Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. But the numbers don't lie. It's not just them. Jeff Weiss, age 16, a mass shooter. Corey Bagsgaard, a mass shooter on Paxil. Chris Fetters, 13, was taking Prozac. Christopher Pittman, age 12, murdered both of his grandparents while taking Zoloft. Matthew Miller, age 13, hung himself in his bedroom closet after taking Zoloft for 6 days. Kip Kinkle, age 15, on Prozac and Ritalin, shot his parents while they slept, then went to school and opened fire, killing 2 classmates and injuring 22 after being prescribed Prozac. Luke Woodham, age 16, was on Prozac, killed his mother, and then killed 2 students, wounding 6 others. Michael Carneal was on Ritalin, age 14, opened fire on students at a high school prayer meeting in West Paddock, Kentucky. 3 teenagers were killed, 5 others wounded. Andrew Golden, age 11, James Wilson, age 19, Elizabeth Bush, age 13, Jason Hoffman, Jared Victor, Chris Shanahan, Jeff Franklin, Kevin Ryder, Alex Kim, Diane Ruthier. I could go on and on and on. Billy Wickham, Kara Java, Gareth Christensen, Matthew Miller, Kurt Danis, Woody Johnson, Hamad Memon, Maddie Sari, and the Finnish gunman, Pekka Erik, age 18, had been taking antidepressants before he killed 8 people and wounded a dozen more in high school. Then stuck the gun in his mouth and blew his brains out. Asa Kuhn, Jared Lee, James Egan Holmes, Jacob Tyler Roberts, and Adam Peter Lanza, age 20, killed 26 and wounded 2 in Newton, Connecticut, or so we're told. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. So what does Solvay and a drug company, however sick they may be, have to do with the powers of darkness and Satan? You say, okay, look, preacher, maybe they're a drug company, maybe they're trying to do some good, but there's side effects we haven't understood and this and that. You still haven't really brought that back to how the powers of darkness could be involved in big pharma. Well, in Belgium, there is a very secret castle situated near the village of Munio in Belgium. This castle, according to many investigators, is the center of the occult and has a cathedral with a dome containing 1,000 lights, a reference used by the New World Order frontman George Bush himself. The castle is referred to as the Mother of Darkness. It is also rumored that the famous Monarch program, or should I say the infamous Monarch programming, was done there. The Castle of Darkness is a place where there are sexual perversions, mind torture, monarch training, sex magic, and even the famous case called the Dutroux Affair, whereby children involved in a sex ring run by pedophiles were used for satanic perversion, offered to the high and mighty who run the world, so much so that skulls are actually found around the woods of the castle. This castle is also known not only as the Mothers of Darkness, but as the Castle of the Kings. And I do want to remind you that in Revelation, the Bible says that there are kings that will rule with the Antichrist. I do not personally believe that these are human kings in and of themselves. They may be something along the lines of Judas. Have not I chosen you, and one of you is a devil? Man, devil, hybrid, whatever you want to say. This castle, its real name is the Chateau des Amoureux, is located in Belgium, near the village of Munio, as I already stated. The castle and its domain once belonged to Prince Philip of Gotha, Count of Flanders, and father of King Albert. He purchased the property in 1869. The castle's romantic style was built in 1877. It actually has 365 windows representing the days of the year. The castle was later bought and is now in the controlling hands of Alice Solvay, niece of the Belgian scientist and industrialist Ernest Solvay, still owned by the Solvays today. Not that I agree with everything that he says at all, but at times he has good information. David Icke makes the following statement, quote, "The reason that Belgium is the headquarters for Satanism and so many brotherhood institutions is very simple. The Brotherhood created Belgium for just this reason in 1831. And they imposed upon it a reptilian royal bloodline, the house of the Saxe-Coburg Gotha, the bloodline of the British royal family. And through its branch in Prussia, the supporters of Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, have tried to run the world. The pedophile murder ring, which came to light in Belgium in 1996, is but one part of the satanic network, operating from and in that country. It was organized by Marc Dutroux, who is connected to the Satanic Order of Abraxas, based in the village near Charolais in southern Belgium, not far at all, from the Castle of Darkness. Abraxas is a fat-bellied demon, from whom it is likely the magical term abracadabra originated. Dutroux, buried alive, an accomplice, supposedly brought out in the court documents, Bernard Weinstein, and among the Weinstein's effects was a letter from somebody named Abraxas. signed by someone describing himself as the Egyptian god Anubis. It ordered him to provide presents for the high priestess of the order, and apparently gave specific details of the age and sex the victim must be. The British Sunday Times reported the accounts of witnesses describing black masses in which children were killed in front of audiences, which included prominent members of the Belgian and UN and EU society. A Belgian newspaper reported that a former commissioner of the European Union was among a group of judges and senior politicians, lawyers, and policemen who attended the orgies at the Belgian chateau organized by Michael Nihoul, one of the accomplices of Mr. Marc Dutroux, the alleged leader of the pedophile ring. One investigator said it was like going back to the medieval ages. In fact, there has not been an old, middle, or modern age, Ike states, with regard to these rituals. It is a seamless flow over thousands of years under the control of the Sarney bloodlines. Human skulls, in fact, were found at the sacrificial sites, identified by witnesses, particularly at the sect's headquarters. The satanic group behind the Belgian murders is said to interconnect with similar rings in Holland, Germany, and America. In truth, it will be part of the global network which operates in all countries. Satanism is run like a transnational corporation. Another writer states the following: one of the global centers of Satanism is the castle of the Mothers of Darkness, the Castle of the Kings. In Belgium, near the appropriately named village Mounio-Bel, the castle is close to the French border and some 20 kilometers from Luxembourg. It is protected from view by thick forests, and guards keep out the curious. Google has reportedly blogged it out so that you can't even see it via Google Earth. In the grounds is a cathedral with a dome containing 1,000 lights, and when President Bush talked about 1,000 points of light, he was speaking in code, many believe, about the place of initiation for the highest initiates in the Satanic Pyramid. In this satanic cathedral is the throne of the High Priestess of the upper hierarchy, a position known as the Queen Mother. Every day, apparently, a child is sacrificed in the basement. Ceremonies are performed here to the satanic goddess known as Lilith, a demon in the Hebrew Kabbalah. In ancient Sumer, the reptilian bloodline, as passed on through the female, was symbolized as Lily. And the main reptilian gene carriers were given names like Lilith, Lil, Lilitu, Liliet. Another demon used by some quote-unquote mothers is Balar, or Bilad, a Kabbalistic name for the force others call Satan. It is from these lands in Belgium and northern France that the bloodline families came, including the Bruces, to take over Scotland, all over centuries of time. Belgium, this little country between France and the Netherlands, is also the home of the European Union, NATO, and some believe a massive computer center where database on all people in the world are being compiled. Isn't it amazing that the Castle of the Mothers of Darkness is located in the same region as the headquarters of the European Union? So, it is apparently this computer system called the Beast. And there are a number of these around the world. In elite mind control, the writer says, operation called the Janus Group is also based in NATO headquarters. Nimrod, Janus, the god with two faces, was later known to the Romans as Janus. So, the company, eyeball deep in pharmaceuticals that can be directly related to the mass murder and manipulation of children, own, coincidentally, the darkest castle in Europe connected with perversion of the most satanic kind. Your local drugstore is peddling a drug produced by a company who owns a castle called the Mothers of Darkness. Of course, there's nothing to see here. There's absolutely no connection. You're way too fanciful, Pastor Tillis. That would never be. No, demonic activity would never take place between pharmaceuticals and castles of darkness. Okay, you might be right. Maybe there is no connection. Why don't you go ahead, take your meds, and go back to sleep. The rabbit hole is far too deep for you to ever possibly imagine. Good night.